Right? So if I hang out here, eventually,
Well, that's yeah. So now you got to turn into.
Have that.
So we're here with Brian Wong today. Just a disclaimer, this is my actual head coach. He's the person that awarded me my black belt. So I'm a little biased, but I do think he is one of the most intelligent and well-spoken instructors on this island. Today we're doing the Drinks Champs version of these interviews. Had a couple beers and we're gonna just shoot the shit and just talk. So first question is just tell me how you got into jiu-jitsu.
Started jiu-jitsu in 1994 after, like everybody else, like most people, after the first UFC. We started way back at UH with all the rest of the House and Gracie guys.
Wow.
100 guys in a class. So I was with them. So we were with Helsing till about the early 2000s. 2010, somewhere around there. I don't remember the exact date.
It was definitely after 2009. I started in 2009, so it was after that.
So it was just about where I met my wife. When did we meet, Mel?
2008.
2008, yeah. So so about 2010, 2011, we changed schools to Novo Niao under Leandro Niza. So we've been with him since then. So it's been a good change. I don't know if I put this in an interview, but less politics.
Okay. All right.
So we like it. Yeah.
Good. And you guys now have your own gym, Jiu-Jitsu Therapy.
Yes.
So at what point did Jiu-Jitsu Therapy start? Because you were training with Niza initially.
So during COVID, I had a lot of free time to think of what changes I would make to the practice of jiu-jitsu. So when we look at all of our friends who've been training jiu-jitsu for a long time, like Alika, we noticed that a lot of our friends have injuries. A lot of our friends' injuries are self-inflicted. So back injuries, shoulder injuries, knee injuries, but not always because somebody injured us, but just the day-to-day grind of training would cause our bodies to get injured. So because of my background with exercise and therapy and COVID lockdown, had far too much free time on my hands. I wanted to think of a new way to approach the training of jiu-jitsu. So we started changing how we practice our warm-ups as well as the practice of jiu-jitsu itself to pay more attention to biomechanics of the human body as we're doing jiu-jitsu.
You guys have a very interesting warm-up, by the way. You kind of like the instead of the pothead version of jiu-jitsu, like the 10th planet, like the nerdy version of jiu-jitsu. Yes. You guys have your own vernacular. You say things that just don't really make sense to anybody but the people in this gym. Yeah. Can you explain how that kind of came through?
So during COVID, I was reading an article by a guy named Serge Krakovetsky, who is a spinal researcher, and he came up with a book called The Spinal Engine, which was how humans evolved through evolution. Humans evolved to walk upright. As I read his article, it would talk about how humans went through a certain progression to move from the ground to standing upright. And all of these progressions, there's certain phases of movements that are mimicked in infants' movement. So as I was looking at the pictures and reading the article, I was like, hey, this is the same movements that we use every day in jiu-jitsu.
Because babies are on the ground.
Because babies are on the ground, they're learning how to ambulate
stand up.
And get up.
All right, I got you.
So we started using the baby movements as the warm-ups and as a way to teach our students how body mechanics work in a simpler model. So it's a fun experiment because, like you said, we have our own vocabulary. Our students start to see how the body's integrated and how we can integrate one lesson into other lessons. So, and it's kind of fun because we'll have like people come and visit, and they're like, "What the hell is going on?" We had one girl knows my wife, and she trains in New York, and she came in on a day that we were talking about body mechanics, and I think we were talking about force vectors and ground reaction forces and physics, and we had drawings on the board, and she was like, "This is the weirdest jiu-jitsu class I've ever been to."
She didn't know she was going to a physics class, like super nerdy stuff. Again,
Super
smartest
nerdy.
guy in jiu-jitsu. So you've had this for about 2.5 years or so. How have you seen the students' progression? Because you have guys that come in as like completely brand new, versus when we started, or when I started, and it was kind of like, here's some moves, learn them.
Right.
How have you seen the progression, and is there a difference in how quick they're picking it up and how effective they are?
So what I like is that we can use the movements and teach more concepts, as opposed to trying to memorize movements, techniques. So as the students get more familiar with the movements, it becomes easier for them to integrate the techniques, because they're basically just different combinations of the same movements over and over again.
Okay.
From a teaching standpoint, I think it's easier because you're just using the same combinations of movements, explaining them in different ways, but the students are always hearing the same stuff over and over again. So I think from a learning standpoint, it's easier to understand rather than trying to memorize the thousands of techniques that Jiu-Jitsu has.
As the students get to a higher level, and those concepts now become more specific, because the better we get, the more we understand, those very small adjustments start to make big differences.
Yes.
Do you then focus on specifics, or do you relate it back then to the core movements?
Yeah, we always relate things back to the core movements, but then we can make it more specific for that student. So if somebody likes, arm bars, we can teach them how to be more efficient at arm bars using certain body mechanics as it relates to arm bars. Somebody likes, back chokes, then we can use the same body mechanics, similar body mechanics, but just change the technique. So it becomes, we're able to specify for the individual, while still teaching the concept to the group. Yeah.
So you come with an actual lesson plan, you show up and you're just like, hey, what problem you got?
Yeah.
Let's just figure this out.
So I because we're in a small school, we don't have a lot of students. We don't advertise. Goal for me wasn't to make a jiu-jitsu school that necessarily makes a lot of money. The goal was to make a jiu-jitsu school teaching the stuff that we believed in. So because our school is smaller, we are able to make the lesson plan more specific for the people who attend class.
Okay.
So it doesn't make sense to have a lesson plan and all white belts show up. And the lesson plan is more advanced, right?
Right.
Same, it doesn't help to make a simple lesson plan for like white belts and all higher guys show up. So just like jiu-jitsu, everything should be flexible and adaptable. So same thing with lesson plans. If we have a lesson plan, that means that it has to be structured in a certain way to teach that lesson, which is not always going to apply to everybody that's in the class. Yeah. So we have a loose lesson plan based on whatever we're working on that day still follows the same understanding of biomechanics and anatomy.
Okay. I guess that'll lead to my next question. How then do you evaluate students as far as skill levels, promotions, things like that?
Okay, so good question. I shouldn't say most schools, but a lot of schools will evaluate students on their ability to memorize techniques.
Right, and the curriculum.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so if we use that as another example, is like most times when we go to school, we're graded on a curve of who memorizes the technique and can answer the questions the best, and those are the smart people or the not so smart people. The cool part with jiu-jitsu is the high level guys are normally the guys who are doing the stuff that are outside of what is the normal. So,
Yeah.
and they're high level because they're able to do things that people weren't thinking of doing before. Right? So we don't evaluate by the ability to memorize techniques, but rather to understand the movements and the concepts and how well you can apply them. So if we have a very small student and we have a very large student, they can't do the technique the same way, but they can use to their best of their ability their own body mechanics to make their technique as efficient as possible for them. So it's not graded on a standard deviation, a bell curve, right? Is everybody has their own bell curve, their own standard deviation. So we have to grade people on their individual merits or skills, abilities, versus saying, well, you're not as good as that person. So,
And that's not a fair way to judge
Right.
people anyway, right? I've always come to you when I've had problems or when I like, hey, I just bounce this idea off you. What do you think? What do you think about this? You've always really like been able to just on the spot help me out. If you had yourself as a student, so we could like go into a time warp type of thing.
Okay.
And you could teach like Brian his first month of jiu-jitsu.
Okay.
What would be the most important thing Brian Black Belt would teach Brian White Belt?
Interesting. So one of the things with the movements that I really like is that as we, so one of the good parts about being a student under Nisa is one day we invited Nisa and we were like, hey Nisa, we have this idea of these movements and we want to share them with you just to see what we're doing. So he came down and he was like, oh, that's interesting. But, so Nisa's funny because he's like, I remember one conversation with Nisa is Nisa came to me because he was having a problem with his hamstring.
Okay.
So I worked on his neck and his hamstring felt better. And he was like, you're like the weirdest guy I know. Because
I explain you like that sometimes.
Because of the anatomy, there was something going on with his neck that was affecting his hamstring. Without going into it. But basically, when we showed him what we were doing, he was like, hey, this is your thing. I understand that you understand the stuff that you're teaching. So, you do you, basically.
Okay.
So that was great because we were no longer tied to a system of you have to do an armbar this way or you have to do a triangle this way. So it gave us the ability to basically go back and question every technique we were ever taught from a mechanical, anatomical, physiological perspective and see, is this really the most efficient way to do it? And for me, that was great because it was like learning jiu-jitsu all over again, right? It was like, okay, this is the way we learn cross choke from the guard. And it's like, okay, but what if we don't do that and we do this instead? And so it was really fun because you got to be a white belt again, right? And question, but you're a white belt, but you could question everything that you're being told from a standpoint of, well, does it really work better, right? So I would say that the white belt me would ask more questions, would be in a sense more disrespectful, right? Like, but why do you do that? Well, why, right?
I think this is why we get along because when I started jiu-jitsu, I just didn't understand any of the customs or traditions, and I just would ask stupid questions all the time. And you're like, "Shut up, Alika," and then you'd be like, "We'll do this." I don't know. Anyways, why don't you promote your gym? You can't even Google it. Like when I Google you, I'm like, what do I gotta Google to find this place? You can't find it Google Maps. You're not on Apple Maps. Why don't you promote this gym?
So, because of our experience with our previous school, politics plays a big role. And unfortunately, like in Hawaii, it's a small place with lots of guys who want to run schools and promote their gym. I understand that there's nothing wrong with that. People want to teach, they want to make money, be able to make a living doing what they enjoy doing, which is great. Fortunately for me, my therapy business pays the bills. So I don't really need to make money teaching. So that becomes, it gives me the ability to teach what I really enjoy, regardless of whether I make money doing it or not. It also moves us away from having to teach for the reason of making money, which sometimes changes how you teach.
It does.
Because you have to keep a student base, so you have to do what will bring in more students.
I understand that.
Because we don't have that need, we can teach what we want, and the people who like it stay, and the people who, don't. So it changes, in my opinion, it changes the feel of the class, because it brings together like-minded people.
It's beautiful.
So I would think, so again, we were visiting a school once, and the guy was like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, how come you guys don't charge money? It's like, well, if you think of most martial arts, how most martial arts started was the same way, that the instructor would pick students, and the students, so here, I'll give you an example. One of my first jiu-jitsu instructors, a guy named Kofi Debra, he's a black belt under Helson Gracie.
Yeah.
When he first met Helson, Kofi was a geneticist at Dole Pineapple. He's the smartest guy I know in jiu-jitsu.
He's also a monster. Yeah. He's the first guy who foot-locked me the wrong way, but it's still why does that hurt?
He used to pay Helson with pineapples. So the teaching of martial arts used to be handed down from instructor to student, and it was more personal. It was not about so much the profitability, but more about the art. So my goal was to see if we could go back. Well, my goal was to see what would happen if we went back to concentrating on the art versus the business of jiu-jitsu. So, yeah, that's why.
So you have, and you're just kind of just giving back.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you just create world champs in this gym that is not promoted on anywhere. So it's kind of thing.
Yeah.
You're like a little samurai. Just walk. You need the samurai bun and just walk around with that thing. Just unsheath the sword. Oh man. If you could change one thing with the competition scene,
Okay.
what would it be?
See, I've never really been that much into the competition scene. My first reason I started training was more for self-defense and personal development.
And you have black belts in other disciplines also.
Correct.
Yes.
And the study of the art. So I really like the study of the art. So, for example, Bruce Lee was a really good example in that he would study physics, he would study human anatomy to make himself better in martial arts, and that kind of was one of the inspirations for me to understand body mechanics better, because as a smaller person, being more efficient with your body helps in the practice of martial arts. But I've never really been that much into the competition, but my wife loves competing, and
She's had a lot of good success.
she's had a few Master World Championships, gold medals, but I would say that probably the biggest change in more recent history is that the competition has created almost like a me atmosphere.
Okay.
Like it's more about me, the competitor, versus the art, right? And again, financially is great that people who had meager or modest beginnings were able to elevate their life, right?
Yeah.
Like it's kind of like the boxers in Mexico that they could change their status by being good.
Right.
But because of that, it also starts to move people away from doing the art for the sake of doing the art, and versus doing the art for the sake of financial gain or notoriety, fame, whatever. So But I mean, that's one of the great things about jiu-jitsu is that it has a lot of things for a lot of different people. People who like to compete can do that. People who just want to train for the sake of training can do that. So it's not a one size fits all. And so that's one of the good things about it.
All right. Well, we're running out of beer.
Yep.
And I think we've had a good discussion. So thank you for your time.
No problem.
You want to shout out like your Instagram or what are you doing? TikToks? Just like rocks you bottles out with notes in them?
Jiu-Jitsu Therapy Hawaii. Not very active. I'm trying to be more active on it to spread our concepts.
There's good content on there.
So when I put some up, it's usually good. It's just not that often. I'm trying to do it more often. The fun part is both the therapy and the practice has allowed us to meet other people and share our ideas. So like we have a friend in Tahiti. He runs Ribeiro Tahiti.
Okay.
That we visit a lot, and we started doing stuff because similar to what we talked about earlier, he had a lot of injuries, and he needed a way to help with his injuries and his students' injuries. So that's been good. So Himano out in Tahiti. We also have another guy in Malaysia, was training with us here. Peter. So Peter Chong out in Malaysia runs Jiu-Jitsu therapy.
That's a fun gym. I've been there.
Yeah.
I've actually been there. Yeah.
So it's kind of fun. Again, the goal for us is to extend the longevity of the people who want to train Jiu-Jitsu for a long time by giving them other ways to practice Jiu-Jitsu in a way that's more focused on longevity versus short-term results at the expense of longevity and health. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
I think that's it.
You're a great human being. Cheers.
Cheers.